Hello and welcome back to the show. If you're new here, my name's Andrea. Welcome and thank you so much for joining. And on this podcast, we take a queer perspective on a deeper meaning of life and discuss topics related to personal growth and spirituality through an inclusive lens. I'm so grateful you're here. Thanks again for joining. And before we get started with today's topic, I would so appreciate it if you're watching on YouTube, if you could hit the subscribe button below. And if you're listening to the audio version, please make sure to follow and subscribe, rate and review. It really helps the show a lot and it means the world to me. Thank you so much. And with that, I want to dive into today's topic. So we'll be doing another solo episode today because this is something that I've been thinking a lot about and that I've been wanting to talk about for quite a while now. And I think is relevant in this current environment and climate we find ourselves in. So today I want to talk about taking things one step at a time. And I know it can sound so cliche when we're going through hard times to then say, yeah, let's take it one day at a time, one step at a time. But I think it is so relevant right now. And one of the reasons that I've been thinking about this. So I live in a small community in Oakland, and it's the kind of neighborhood where people know each other. And so when I'm walking my dog around the neighborhood and I run into neighbors, we talk about what's going on in the country and in the world because obviously that's top of mind for everyone. So when I chat with neighbors and we ask each other how we're doing, one thing that we say quite a lot is, yeah, we got to take it one day at a time. And the other day I was talking to one of my neighbors who I run into every now and then, and we were talking about everything going on. And when we were ready to say bye, I said, yeah, we got to take it one day at a time. And then my neighbor said, this very kind elderly lady who has a dog too, she said, yes, and if that feels like too much right now, we got to take it 1 hour at a time. And if that feels like too much, we take it one day, one step at a time. And this reminded me of another conversation I had when I was much, much younger, in my early 20s, almost 2 decades ago, but that really stuck with me. With everything going on, I've been also thinking quite a lot about first coming to the US, what I envisioned my life would be like. And so that's another reason why I thought back on that conversation. And so that relates back to, I talked about in a podcast before how I've felt this yearning to move to the US since I was like 12, 13 years old. So ever since I watched 90210 growing up, that's a guilty pleasure of mine. One of my friends actually asked me the other day, what's like one guest that you would love to have on the show that's like a dream guest? And there are a few. And besides Courtney Love, I said certain people that were on 90210, and it sounds so random, but it was a guilty pleasure of mine. Again, I talked about it in different podcasts, but it's got me through a really hard time in my life when I was in my early teenage years. And so even though some of the storylines are so problematic, watching them now, some episodes I can't watch any longer, the show still has a special place in my heart just because it did help me through that hard time. So that was a bit of an ADHD tangent, but back to today's topic. So I've always had that wish in my heart ever since I was in my early teenage years to move to the US. And it's something that I dreamed about, but I didn't see it happening because I lived in a small town in Austria. At that point, it didn't even look like I would finish high school or middle school. So it was a really rough time in my life, and I definitely didn't see myself moving to the US. It was more like a faraway dream that kept me going. But throughout the years, that dream would come back and would really fill my heart. And again, I would daydream, but didn't necessarily think it would happen. And so this relates back to a topic today of taking things one step at a time. When I was in my early 20s, right around the time when I was 21, me and my older sister went on a vacation to Miami and we were super excited. We went off season because it was much cheaper. And that way we were able to get a hotel. I think it was close to or at the beach. And obviously, we knew there was always the danger of experiencing a tropical storm or tornado. But we went anyways because we really wanted to go. And so, what happened is we ended up going to Miami. We were super excited. But we ended up experiencing a tropical storm and we were stuck in the hotel for a day or two. And the people working at the hotel were super, super nice. And so we would talk to them and hang out in the lobby because we were stuck in the hotel and didn't know what to do. And I remember there was this super kind lady working at the front desk. And so we would chat with this receptionist, and she was just super sweet. And then at some point I told her about that dream that I'd had for a long time of moving to the US one day. And I asked her that if I wanted to move to the US from small town Austria, what would she recommend I do? And she said to me, you take it one step at a time. And the first step that I would take is really focus on building your English skills and everything you read, every book you read it in English. And I've always loved reading. I'm a real bookworm. And so I was like, I'll do that. And honestly, when I asked her that question, I was hoping she's going to tell me about this big step that I should be taking that's going to lead me right to the US. So I was a little disappointed that it was such a small step, but I was like, I can do that. And so I started reading all of my books in English. On each page of a book would find one word that was new to me. So I would build my vocabulary. I took English classes. And what happened was that really started to build momentum and a certain energy around my dream because it started with a small step. Then I took English classes. And as I've talked in previous episodes before, that eventually led me to coming across a scholarship opportunity to go to Ohio. And even though Ohio wasn't the place I had dreamed of, because I'd been really wanting to go to California, Florida, one of those places I knew from TV, it was really the place where I felt like I needed to be at that time in my life in 2007, 2008. Because, as I talked about in previous episodes before, that's when I became friends with the first queer person in my life who was proud to be out and who showed me a different way of being queer. Because in my small town, there were very few queer people. I can't even think of a handful. And the people who were out, everyone talked about that. And so meeting my friend Gregor in Ohio, and he was also the person who helped me with my coming out, it really showed me a different way of being queer that I had not necessarily seen. And then that also helped me come out while I was in Ohio. And I talked about my coming out experience in a different episode. It was quite dramatic, but if you want to hear more about that, please make sure to listen to that episode. I'm telling this story because it reminded me that, yes, it is those small steps that can lead up to big things. Because reading more in English, building my vocabulary, taking English classes, that all created a momentum and an energy that eventually led me to fulfilling my dream. And I've been thinking about this a lot as we're talking about what's going on in the US, what's going on around the world. And as some of you might know, I'm an activist at heart. I've been thinking a lot about how I can help make a difference right now and help fight this crazy situation we find ourselves in as a country and in the world. How can I do my part to bring about change and bring light into the world? And I've been thinking about these conversations around one step at a time because this also reminded me, yes, it is important to hold that larger vision in mind of the world we want to create. And that is what will keep us going. But it's the small steps that add up to big things and big change. And I know we have some international listeners, which I'm super grateful for too. And I'm sure you've seen the No Kings protest. I know there were protests around the world, which was so great to see. And I think that gave us a lot of momentum, a lot of positive energy that we can now use to move things forward and really think, again, one step at a time and think locally. And obviously, what we're seeing here in the US, around the world, it's all very tragic right now. But in the most recent tragic news, as many of you, I'm sure, are aware, due to the government shutdown here in the US, money is running out for food assistance. And so that's going to be impacting low income individuals and families, disabled people, really the most vulnerable among us. And it is so sad to see. And just from my conversations with friend, even looking on Nextdoor online, talking to neighbors, a lot of people are asking themselves, how can I make a difference? And again, I think it comes back to one step at a time. And I'm just using this as an example because there's so many different issues going on in the world. And I know it can be really overwhelming, but and I think for me as an activist, that what I've come to learn is it is really about finding one cause that you're super passionate about and really honing in on that cause. But then, of course, there's many, many other causes that need our attention and where we can also make a difference in small and meaningful ways. And so again, using the hunger crisis that we'll likely see in the US starting within the next couple days, during a time when things are already very difficult and people are really struggling. Again, I think we can make a difference one step at a time. And I've been talking with friends, with neighbors, other people on how we can help in small ways. There's so many small steps that we can take that add up to really big things. I've been reading up a lot on mutual aid and kind of best practices around mutual aid, and just some of the examples that I've come across and read about and talked about with friends that can help us take these small steps to address the hunger crisis in the US. And I'll be sharing the resources I find on my Instagram as well, but we can donate to food banks. I've heard people talk about our free little libraries. So all over the US, I don't know if it's the same in other countries, but all over the US, some people have free little libraries in front of the houses where people can donate books and take books. And people have also talked about how those can be used to donate canned goods that people can take. I also saw restaurants, family owned restaurants, giving out free meals. So there's a lot of amazing local activism helping here. Sometimes it can be as easy as checking in on a neighbor if they need anything. For example, I live in a building where people really help each other out. It's really nice because we really are a community of neighbors. Obviously, there's issues sometimes too, but we really try to help each other out, and people check in on each other. People ask each other if they need anything. So, for example, I had a neighbor, unfortunately, he moved out, but he would carry up, I live on the second floor, he would carry up my really heavy boxes of cat litter and he would just deliver them right to my door. So, things like that, it makes such a big difference. Or the other day, my elderly neighbor living next door made some soup and gave me some lentil soup, and it was a really difficult week and it meant so much. It obviously the soup was really good, but just that feeling of someone caring and someone extending a kindness, I think we sometimes underestimate how much of a difference that makes. And of course, at different times in our lives we have varying degrees of capacity, and there's people who can do big things, and that's awesome, but also those small steps do really matter. And even something small like being patient with people, extending a kindness or a smile to a person outside, saying hello in the morning, I do think those things can all add up to big things, and that's how we make a difference. And again, as an advocate, I've worked with national nonprofits on changing laws around queer rights and other issues I care about. And those things are really important. And the people, and for the people who have the capacity to do that, I'm so grateful because it is hard work. But we can also create change one step or at a time in our local communities and in our local environments. And again, some of the things I talked about in terms of solution sets in no way comprehensive. And I'm really now in the process of educating myself on mutual aid. So again, not comprehensive, but I'll be sharing more resources I find in my Instagram stories. So I would love to connect on there. You can find me under Queer Soul Seeker. But yeah, to wrap things up, again, I just want to say I think it really is about keeping the vision in mind about the world we want to create and thinking large scale in that way, but then really thinking locally and in our communities in terms of how we can help make a difference. Yes, taking it back to what I shared earlier when I talked about how the small steps I took when I was starting in my early 20s eventually brought me here to the US. Obviously, I didn't think I would be living through such difficult times coming to the US. I never thought I would be living through a revolution. But once again, whenever I feel very hopeless about the state of the country and the world, I remind myself of those small steps that eventually lead to big things. Thank you again so much for joining. That's all I got for today, but really appreciate you tuning in. And I know things are really difficult right now and everyone's struggling, but again, it's those small steps that really matter right now. And we really got to rely on community on each other right now. And that's how we get through these times. Sending out my love and thank you again so much for joining.